My name is Maria Dolphin, and I'm about to turn 27. I've been married for 5 years and have a 4-year-old son named Martin. At first, I worked full-time, but now I work part-time at the same company. My husband is 30 years old, 3 years older than me. Kevin Carlton, who I married, seemed sweet when we were dating, but things changed after marriage. He became more controlling. Kevin has a 20-year-old sister named Jane Dalton, and he spoils her a lot, maybe because of their big age gap. Before we got married, I didn't really mind how close Jane and Kevin were. But after tying the knot, I started noticing some changes. Jane frequently drops by our place, and I end up scrambling to cater to her every whim because Kevin always caves into her demands. She shows up unannounced, morning or night, without bringing any gifts or even a thank you. She acts like I'm invisible, only talking to Kevin, saying, "Hey brother, I'm here again." Kevin, oblivious to the fact that I didn't prepare dinner for Jane, asks if she wants to eat. When I try to discreetly mention it to Kevin, he brushes it off, leaving me to serve my own dinner to Jane in the end. Then, loud enough for Jane to hear, he blames me, saying things like, "You should have made more food." Jane looks like she's going to cry and apologizes to me. Kevin comforts her and scolds me, saying things like, "You're not considerate," or "Don't be mean to my sister." Even though Jane apologizes, it's clear she feels reassured by how Kevin takes her side. It's like she enjoys it. I end up making my own meal from leftovers while they eat together. Just as I'm about to join them, Jane tells Kevin she wants to talk alone. Kevin moves me and Martin to another room. This isn't the first time. After we finish eating and clean up, I find them chatting on the sofa. They never bothered to clean up after themselves. It feels like they see me as a maid, not a wife or sister-in-law. They don't even talk to Martin. It's like I'm just a maid bringing my kid to work. I was tidying up the kitchen and getting ready to bathe Martin when Kevin suddenly called me, even though it was almost 8 p.m. He said, "Jane wants cake. Go buy it now. Get it from the shop by the station," telling me exactly where to go. But going out to buy cake would make Martin go to bed late. When I hesitated, Jane insisted, "I want it now," and Kevin rushed me, saying, "It's fine if he stays up a bit longer tonight." Then Kevin started yelling at me, blaming me for having an attitude with Jane around. I knew I'd have to go to the cake shop eventually, so I reluctantly agreed. There's a cake shop near the station that closes at 9 p.m. So if I hurry, I can make it. As I was getting ready to go, I overheard them talking, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. They were saying things like, "She's so thoughtless," and "Why did you marry her?" Since I couldn't leave Martin alone, I decided to take him with me. While I was getting Martin ready, I heard Kevin's loud voice from a living room. "If you defy me again, we'll get a divorce." Martin could hear it too. He might not understand the words, but I think he knows his parents are fighting. Trying to control my emotions, I asked Martin, "What kind of cake would you like?" He perked up and said, "Mom, I want a cake with lots of fruits." So on our way to the cake shop, we chatted about cakes, momentarily forgetting about Kevin's words. We made it to the cake shop just before it closed. Luckily, they had the cake Jane wanted. We bought 2 cakes and the fruit-loaded cake Martin desired. When we got back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Kevin. I prepared Martin's cake and brought it to the dining room. As soon as I set it down in front of Martin, Jane pointed at it and said, "Actually, I want that cake." Before I could respond, Kevin moved Martin's cake in front of Jane. Ignoring Martin's protests, Jane started eating his cake. Kevin justified it by saying, "I bought that cake with my money, so I get to choose." Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I expressed my frustration to Kevin and Jane. Kevin then threatened, "We could get a divorce, you know." Martin stopped crying but held my hand tightly, looking worried. Then, after a moment, Martin said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries. It's really yummy." He mentioned it while eating the cake that Jane initially wanted. I feel like I'm putting Martin through too much. 3 adults, myself included, shouldn't be subjecting a 4-year-old child to this. When I saw Jane reaching for Martin's cake, I swiftly moved his plate away. Martin happily followed me to another room, saying, "Yummy, let's go over here." Probably Kevin noticed Jane's attempt too. He apologized to her, saying, "Sorry for being so tight-fisted." I wanted to respond, but I held back, not wanting to expose Martin to the word divorce. Seeing Martin innocently enjoying his cake is heartwarming. After he finished, ignoring Kevin and Jane, We decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I woke up to find Jane had already left. I was about to wake up Kevin and Martin and make breakfast when I heard Martin crying. I rushed to him to find his piggy bank, a gift from my father, broken, and all his saved money gone. It was Martin's nightly ritual to bid goodnight to his piggy bank before going to sleep. Last night was no exception. He said goodnight to it and cuddled up with me. At that time, only Kevin and Jane were in the living room. I asked Kevin about the piggy bank. He responded casually, saying that Jane needed some money, so she took it from Martin's piggy bank. Martin was still crying as I held him close. His pain was so palpable that it brought tears to my eyes. It was agonizing to see Kevin prioritize and cater to his sister Jane over our son Martin. Anger and sadness flooded over me simultaneously. "Why are you making a morning so miserable?" Kevin retorted. "Don't you think you did something wrong? Martin is crying so much." For the first time since we got married, I let my anger out towards him. I had always avoided arguing in front of Martin, but I couldn't stay silent seeing him so hurt. Kevin looked at me intensely, then went to the bedroom without saying a word, returning with something in his hand. To my shock, Kevin handed me divorce papers, something I didn't even know he had stashed away. "If you're not happy with me, then let's get a divorce," he declared, thrusting the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud slam of the door. Martin, who had never shed tears over the issues with Kevin and Jane, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He had been crying since last night, and it broke my heart to see him in such pain. "Hey Martin, how about we skip daycare today?" I suggested, hoping to bring him some comfort. He eagerly agreed with a loud yes, flashing me a faint smile. As Martin brought a picture book from the shelf and settled onto my lap, he looked up at me with joy and asked, "Today Mama is the teacher at daycare, right?" His innocence was like a ray of sunshine. I couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. Today, I decided that we would spend the day playing and cherishing each moment together to fill his heart with happiness. I might be causing some inconvenience at work, but when I explained the situation, they kindly granted me a day off, advising me to spend quality time with Martin. In the morning, we headed to the park, played games like hide and seek, and had a blast on the swings and slides. Upon returning home for lunch, Martin seemed tired and soon dozed off on my lap, just like he used to when he was a baby. Normally, I would use this time to catch up on chores. But today felt different, so I decided to cherish the moment and enjoy watching him sleep peacefully. As I started to drift off myself, I was startled by a noise from the front door. It was too early for Kevin to be back, so I felt uneasy. Quickly, I scooped up Martin, and grabbing only my bag with essentials, I hurriedly hid with him in the bedroom closet. I froze as I sensed someone entering the house, holding my breath as I heard a familiar voice. The person seemed to be searching for something, muttering, "I can't find it." Where did the wife hide it? Fear gripped me as I listened to the sound of rummaging, but as I focused on the voice, I recognized it. It was Jane. Questions flooded my mind. Why did she have a key? What was she searching for? I cautiously cracked open the closet door to see what she was up to. She was rifling through drawers and cabinets, then let out a frustrated sigh before making a phone call. "I searched where you said, but it's not there." "Yeah, I checked there too. If it's not there, it's a waste of time." "Okay, got it. Heading home now," she said, mentioning Kevin's name. Kevin? I wondered what they were searching for. I heard the front door lock, and when it was safe, I put Martin to bed and pondered the strange events. I was certain Kevin was involved in whatever they were looking for. If they were searching for something unknown, could it be one of my possessions? Despite their earlier conversation, I couldn't decipher why Jane had suddenly appeared at our house. Kevin felt like a stranger to me, and I was overcome with a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Hastily, I packed the essentials for Martin and myself. By the time Martin woke from his nap, I was ready to leave. "Martin, let's go to Grandpa's house," I said, and we made our way to the station, catching a train to my parents' home. Thankfully, it was just 2 stops away, so we arrived swiftly. Since I hadn't informed them beforehand, my parents were surprised, but they sensed something was wrong and welcomed us without prying. Their dog, a favorite of Martin's, greeted him eagerly, and they began playing together. Watching them, I felt a sense of relief and proceeded to recount everything that had happened with Kevin and Jane. "Perhaps Jane was searching for your bank cards," my mother suggested. It made sense. Before getting married, I had founded a successful online shop for handmade goods with friends. As the CEO of the handmade industry, I gained recognition, but when the shop flourished, I decided to focus on raising my child. I've entrusted my company to trusted friends while I focus on raising my child. I work part-time and handle most tasks from home. Though I'm still the CEO, Kevin is unaware of this. He knows about my previous role and likely suspects I have savings. I've informed him that I receive assistance from the company but left out the CEO details, letting him assume I stepped down. I haven't disclosed the full extent of my CEO position or savings to Kevin for a reason. Shortly after our marriage, I discovered his poor money management skills. He spends everything he earns. He allocates only $200 monthly for food expenses and suggested I quit my job to be a full-time housewife, an idea I never agreed to, given the financial strain of such a small allowance. After some persuasion, he reluctantly agreed to let me work part-time at my current company. To ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he even had me sign a post-marital property waiver with a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I've been allotted only $200 for food expenses. Consequently, I've been using my savings to cover Martin's nursery fees and clothing expenses. I've refrained from asking Kevin for money beyond the food budget, leading him to assume I have substantial savings. Jane appears to be in dire need of money, and with Kevin's belief in my savings, they may be searching for my cash cards. It all makes sense now. I maintain a separate savings account dedicated to slowly accumulating funds for Martin's future. A portion of my salary is automatically deposited into this account each month. Given their financial circumstances, it's highly likely they are seeking my cash cards. No matter how hard Jane or Kevin search, they won't find my valuables because I always keep them close, including my cash cards. However, there's still an unresolved issue. Jane might be entering our house even when we're not there, possibly with Kevin's knowledge. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables in my parents' safe. Why are they so desperate for money? As I pondered this question, Martin tearfully approached my father, explaining that his piggy bank had been broken, and he couldn't keep his promise to save up. My father's face flushed with anger upon hearing Martin's story. "I'll call Kevin and talk to him," my mother suggested. While chiding my father, "Let's find out their motives." She reasoned that since Kevin had mentioned divorce, he might try to blame us and make the divorce more favorable for himself. Therefore, it's essential to calmly uncover their motives now to prevent them from escaping with excuses later on. I decided to secretly record their conversation to uncover their motives. My parents suggested consulting a lawyer who was a longtime family friend. Once back home, I started cooking dinner as usual when Kevin returned. I discreetly began recording on my phone, keeping the screen face down to avoid detection. To my surprise, Kevin immediately asked me where I kept my cash cards. When I questioned his sudden interest, he provided vague answers, attempting to deceive me. Remaining silent, I watched as Kevin's demeanor shifted to one of numbness and sadness. "Give me all your part-time earnings for my sister," he demanded, but I refused, explaining that the money was for Martin's savings. This enraged Kevin, who then angrily pushed divorce papers toward me from his bag. "You're relying on my money, so don't defy me," he retorted, dismissing the importance of saving for Martin. His words implied a greater value placed on Jane over Martin, leaving me stunned and disheartened. Upon hearing Kevin's words, I halted my meal preparations, calmly placed the divorce papers into the bag I had prepared earlier, and grasped Martin's hand, leading him to the door. Kevin's voice boomed behind us, declaring, "I'm serious about the divorce. Don't ever return." In response, I asserted, "I won't return to a home where anyone can come and go as they please," before departing. Was it too harsh to label my sister-in-law as a stranger? Following my departure, I was bombarded with messages and calls from Kevin, all of which I chose to ignore. I powered off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. There, I played the recording of Kevin's conversation and showed them the completed divorce papers. My parents simply advised, "Do as you see fit." I didn't harbor any love or affection for Kevin, but I still cared deeply for Martin. Some advised me to divorce Kevin to spare Martin's feelings, but I feared that divorcing could also hurt Martin. Amidst this inner turmoil, Martin voiced his hunger, prompting my mother to whip up his favorite dish, hamburgers. Tears welled up in my eyes as my mother, with a gentle smile, said to Martin, "I made these hamburgers so you and Mom can visit us anytime." After taking a bite, Martin beamed and exclaimed, "Grandma's hamburgers are the best. I want them every day," his joyful words tugging on heartstrings. I replied, "It's because these hamburgers are made with all the love I have for you," as he sweetly fed me a bite. Overwhelmed by his kindness, tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. I tried to suppress them, but they kept flowing. My father reassured Martin, who was alarmed by my tears, saying, "Mommy is crying because she's so happy you gave her this hamburger. These are tears of joy, not sadness," he explained tenderly. Martin, in his innocence, remarked, "This hamburger is so yummy. If Jane were here, she'd love it too." Hearing this, I couldn't hold back my tears, and I embraced him tightly, while my father's eyes filled with emotion. Turning to Martin, I said, "Being with family is a blessing, isn't it?" He looked puzzled and asked, "Didn't Dad say only Jane is family? Is my family just Mom, Grandpa, and Grandma?" My father responded gently, "Yes, that's right," then asked Martin, "Would you like to stay here with us as family?" Martin chuckled and replied, "Of course. We're family," bringing smiles to everyone's faces. When was the last time we had such a natural meal? When did we last enjoy a meal filled with endless laughter and conversation? Despite contemplating divorce, the happiness of this meal persuaded me to finally part ways with Kevin. I planned to break the news to Martin, though the thought weighed heavily on my heart. Surprisingly, Martin seemed to understand and embrace the idea of divorce, expressing, "We'll still be a family." He happily cuddled our pet dog, affectionately referring to him as his little brother, despite the dog being older. With resolve, I began preparations for the divorce. Firstly, I promptly contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father, arranging to meet the following day. That night, Martin slept with my father and the dog, their faint laughter bringing me comfort as I lay in bed with my mother, reminiscing about my childhood. The next morning, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 missed calls and messages from Kevin, reflecting his emotional turmoil. Just the sight of it drained me, prompting me to switch off my phone once more. Today, I met with the lawyer, discussing the details and confirming my decision to divorce. We finalized the paperwork, and the lawyer will meet with Kevin tomorrow to proceed. After some time, the lawyer visited my parents' house to discuss the situation. It turned out that Jane had accrued a substantial debt from gambling and excessive shopping, with Kevin serving as her guarantor. When Jane couldn't make the repayments, they devised a plan to tap into my savings. Now, Kevin wants me and Martin back and is retracting his desire for a divorce, the lawyer explained. However, the divorce papers I had submitted earlier had already been processed. When asked if this meant the divorce was finalized, the lawyer confirmed it, stating, "Yes, it's been accepted." Kevin appeared to break down, expressing his fear of losing me to another man. Despite his emotional plea, knowing that everything was settled brought me a sense of peace. I anticipated arguments over child support, but Kevin even pledged to pay $340 to support Martin every month. Later, Kevin called me. Feeling relieved after the divorce proceedings, I decided to speak with him briefly. His tone was no longer aggressive. Instead, he spoke calmly. He confessed that he believed keeping me financially dependent would prevent me from seeking a divorce. He also acknowledged his tendency to spoil his younger sister, Jane, as a misguided form of sibling love. He admitted feeling jealous of Martin, fearing he had lost me to our son. "Once I've resolved Jane's debts, I'll come back for you. Please don't remarry until then," he pleaded. However, I firmly reiterated that I no longer loved him and wouldn't reconsider our relationship. Before hanging up, I could hear him sobbing softly as he whispered, "Please be happy. Did I manage to stay strong until the end?" Discussing future plans with my parents, I decided to remain at their house until Martin grows up, and he transferred to a different nursery. Returning to my role as company president, I explained the situation to my colleagues. Later, I learned that Kevin and Jane had disclosed the divorce and their debt to their parents, resulting in their disannulment. More than the financial issues, their parents were incensed about never seeing their grandson again. Now, Kevin and Jane, once close, reside in a modest apartment, constantly blaming each other. Their actions have led to their own downfall. Today, I find happiness in being with my family. "7 years ago, I got married to my husband. His sister already had kids back then. But right from the start, I felt like I wasn't really part of their family. My sister-in-law made it clear that I wasn't their aunt. She even told her kids that I wasn't their aunt. Because of this, I don't feel close to them like I do with my husband's other siblings' kids, who I treat like my own nieces and nephews. I love spending time with them and being a fun aunt. I've done things like painting their rooms and taking them on trips because I like being creative and making them happy. Even though I'm a mom now, I still love doing these things for my nieces and nephews because they're like my family and I never really had one before. But when it comes to my sister-in-law's kids, I don't do any of that anymore. I've stopped trying to talk to them because my sister-in-law made it clear that she doesn't want me involved. I don't want to cause any drama or trouble by interacting with them since it seems like she doesn't want us to connect. Now, our kids feel jealous and left out because their cousins have cool stuff in their rooms and get to do fun things, while they don't. When my sister-in-law confronted me about it, she blamed me for making her kids feel that way. I told her it was her fault for creating a situation where I couldn't relate to her kids, and now they're the ones suffering because of it. I reminded her that she's reaping what she sowed, and her kids are the ones paying the price for it. Now she's all fired up, saying this and that. It's clear she's not happy, and honestly, I never wanted my kids to see her as their aunt anyway. The rest of the family just shakes their heads at her antics, but I know this tension isn't helping anyone. I do feel bad for her kids though. I can't help but wonder if I've made things worse. She doesn't see me as family to her kids because we're not related by blood or adoption. I don't think I'm in the wrong here, and it's frustrating to see the family dismiss her behavior. If anyone confronted me about it, I'd explain that I've always respected her role as a parent, even when she asked me to step back from being an aunt years ago. It hurt, but I understood and never crossed any boundaries. It's unfortunate that things turned out this way, but I had to respect her wishes. I didn't set these boundaries, I just followed them. When she complained to OP could have responded, "Do I know you?" But I wonder if the sister-in-law was the only daughter among the siblings. Maybe OP being the first woman to marry into the family triggered her. Over time, as the other brothers got married and had kids, she became less aggressive, but the damage was done. The only reason the sister-in-law regrets it now is because OP turned out to be a fantastic aunt to other children, and the sister-in-law's plan backfired. Actions have consequences. You followed her instructions not to get involved. It seems like the rest of the family knows she's difficult too. Everyone here seems to have their faults. You probably aren't telling the whole story about what's going on between you and your sister-in-law. But it's not fair for either of you to involve the kids. And what about your husband? Does he also ignore his niece and nephew? Why is he supporting either of you acting this way? I couldn't disagree more. The sister-in-law made the choice to exclude OP and is now causing conflict because OP respected the boundary she set around her kids. Are you suggesting OP should have ignored that boundary? I understand your concern for her kids. Sadly, they suffer because of their mom's actions. But before you try to change anything, consider how your sister-in-law will react. She might turn any contact into something negative. Keep that in mind as you decide what to do next. This situation happened 2 months ago, but he's still upset about it. I'm a 45-year-old woman. I love my oldest son, but he's almost an adult and acts like one. In our family, everyone takes turns doing chores like cooking, washing dishes, and cleaning common areas on different days. Unfortunately, my son dislikes chores and always tries to avoid them. It's been an ongoing struggle. Washing dishes is particularly troublesome. He fills the dishwasher too much, preventing the detergent from reaching the dishes, leading to them not getting clean. I interrupted him quickly and reminded him that the dishwasher sanitizes dishes. My husband supported me, saying, if he wants dinner, he'll eat from his dishes. He often promised to wash some, but I refused, reminding him that he had the chance to clean them properly the night before. I told him to eat from them as they were or skip dinner. He yelled and threatened to make his own food, but I stood firm. Eventually he gave in, reluctantly selecting the least dirty dishes and eating quietly. I felt bad seeing him so disgusted, but I was tired of the wasted time, water, and detergent. It turned out well. His dishes came out perfectly clean afterward. However, he's still angry, and I do feel guilty now. But I'm tired of his deliberate laziness causing problems for everyone else in the house. Am I wrong? You're not wrong, and I think you handled the situation well. However, I disagree with your statement that he doesn't realize his laziness screws over everyone else in the house. He knows, he just doesn't care. He's old enough to understand the consequences of his actions. and it's time he learns. This should have been addressed sooner. If he doesn't face consequences, he won't change his behavior. Instead, he learned that even when I make a mistake, my parents will have to fix it because they need to eat too. What OP did was smart because he's almost an adult, and it's time to learn how to do things properly. The fact that he suddenly knew how to do the dishes correctly overnight shows that he was capable all along but chose not to do them properly. Well done, OP. I grew up in poverty but worked harder than anyone else to achieve success in my personal, financial, and professional life. My family often had to choose between bus fare and a meal. So when I became financially successful, many people approached me for help. I helped them out of compassion and understanding, knowing how much a small gesture can mean to someone in need. However, many of those I helped started to see me as their personal ATM. I never faced this issue with people who were already financially stable. They would have been embarrassed to ask. While I don't spoil my kids, we do live comfortably in a nice house in a good neighborhood, and I expect them to work hard and excel in school. My eldest son, a teenager, got into trouble for telling a peer that he didn't want to be friends because of his financial situation. A teacher overheard and reacted strongly. Unlike that teacher, I took the time to understand the context and facts before responding. My son then began spending time with Austin. Austin would often lament about not having money to participate in activities, so my son would sometimes cover for him. Like when they went to see Top Gun and Austin couldn't afford a ticket, my son paid for him. However, things got uncomfortable when Austin began to expect my son to foot the bill regularly. The tipping point came when they went to Ihill with friends, and Austin assumed my son would pay for his meal too. While my son only ordered onion rings, Austin indulged in a full meal, dessert, and milkshake. Later, my son vented to their friends about how little money he receives from me, and yet he still has to work as a tutor, only for Austin to take advantage of his generosity. Consequently, their friends distanced themselves from Austin. A few weeks later, in class, Austin wondered why he wasn't being invited to hang out anymore. My son replied, because he's tired of covering for him. Austin responded, but I'm poor. My son sarcastically remarked, oh, so you're too poor to be friends with? Maybe I should quit school and get a job like him. This exchange prompted a call from the teacher. I clarified the context of the conversation to the teacher, as she wasn't receptive when my son tried to explain it. She labeled my son as mean and threatened detention. I informed her that I would advise my son not to serve detention for this incident and asked her what she planned to do about it. She ultimately dropped the matter. Edit. It's important to note that Austin isn't in extreme poverty. He has access to resources like last year's iPhone. He has the ability to work like other kids at their school, but chooses not to. You're not in the wrong here. Consider discussing with the head teacher the emotional toll on your son, who has been coerced into giving money repeatedly, and how the last incident bordered on theft. Your son deserves support in standing up to emotional manipulation and bullying, and he has the right to end the friendship. The teacher should have heard the whole story before jumping to conclusions. Everyone involved made mistakes here. While your son's outburst might warrant detention, it's not ideal for you to interfere with a teacher's disciplinary actions unless there's a significant issue with her approach. It might be beneficial to help your son improve how he expresses himself to avoid more serious consequences in the future. I agree, your son has the right to stand up for himself. But the way he expressed it could have been kinder. A more effective approach would have been to say something like, I don't want to be friends with someone who takes advantage of me, which addresses the real issue without targeting Austin's financial situation. Being overly confrontational with someone who feels entitled might lead to further trouble. Given the circumstances, your son's response wasn't entirely unreasonable. It was a sarcastic retort to someone making excuses for their behavior. The teacher's refusal to listen to the full story and her decision to focus on a poorly worded phrase taken out of context didn't help the situation. I know it might sound odd, but I don't think I'm in the wrong here. I just need some other perspectives on this. My brother, who dropped out of high school, recently got married to his wife, who has similar qualifications, at the young age of 19. I'm 23, just to give some context. The situation is complicated, but basically my brother's mother-in-law pushed them into getting married because she wanted a grandchild as soon as possible. Unfortunately, my own mother went along with it, which I find frustrating. Now my new sister-in-law is expecting, which confirms my suspicions. I know I might seem disrespectful, but I'm not happy about it. We're not well off financially. My dad, who used to be assertive, didn't step in to prevent this situation. Ironically, he persuaded me against attending the college I wanted because of the high tuition fees. To cover the wedding costs, my dad borrowed money from my uncle, his brother, and now he's pressuring me to repay it because my brother and sister-in-law, being young and expecting, can't afford to. They told me they're in too much debt to get a loan from a bank, so it falls on me since I'm debt-free with savings and a job. When they brought this up, I didn't say anything. I just laughed and left. Now they're bombarding me with calls and texts, asking for financial help. But I refuse to budge. It feels like we're living in completely different realities. It's not about culture or anything like that. Am I wrong for refusing to take out a loan for my family? Definitely not. Goodness, what a chaotic situation. If no one can afford to cover the wedding costs, what about the baby? It seems like they'll keep turning to you for loans they won't repay. Stand your ground. This isn't your problem to fix, so don't entertain further discussions about it. If they can't afford a lavish wedding without a substantial loan, maybe they should prioritize their resources for the baby instead. Laughing in their faces was a fitting response to such a ridiculous request. Oh, please ensure that you're the only one with access to your savings. Secure your accounts with updated passwords and avoid staying logged into online banking on shared devices. It's important to take these precautions, especially if your parents have access to personal information like your social security number and employment history. While you might believe they wouldn't take advantage of you, financial strain can drive people to make unexpected decisions. That's right. If they have your social security number, they could potentially open credit in your name, leaving you in a difficult situation. It's a quick process, but you can easily lock your credit by contacting the major reporting agencies, usually 3 of them, either by phone or online. Reversing the lock is simple when you're ready to apply for loans for things like a home, education, or a car. Their financial irresponsibility shouldn't fall on your shoulders. They need to figure out a repayment plan for your uncle on their own. Growing up, I lived with my best friend and his wife, Amanda, on I-35. While Amanda has always been a friend, I've had a closer relationship with her husband. Unfortunately, they moved out of town years ago, only returning for significant family events like funerals or weddings. A few months back, Amanda visited for her sister-in-law's bachelorette party, despite feeling uneasy about it due to her sister-in-law's mistreatment stemming from jealousy or other issues. Wanting to ease her nerves, I offered to pick her up from the airport and take her out for drinks afterward. However, I made a mistake and forgot to add it to my calendar. I had already planned a date for that night and couldn't cancel it, so I arranged for the sister-in-law's best friend to pick up Amanda and take her to the hotel. 2 days later, I met up with Amanda for drinks. She was feeling really down after her mistreatment at the bachelorette party, where everyone else seemed to ignore her. We spent a few hours chatting and drinking, and then I received a text from my girlfriend, asking me to come over to her apartment. I arranged for a mutual friend to join Amanda at the bar and keep her company before leaving. After that night, Amanda stopped communicating with me. She ignored my texts and social media messages for 3 months. Finally, I decided to ask my best friend about what was going on with his wife. He listed a series of complaints Amanda had against me, including forgetting her birthday multiple times despite Facebook reminders, which she doesn't use, and the incident at the bar where I forgot to pick her up from the airport and left her alone. I explained to my friend that I tend to be absent-minded, and they should have been aware of that by now. I also mentioned that Amanda is overly sensitive and holds onto grudges. I reminded him that I had already apologized to her for everything, so I didn't understand why she was still upset. However, my best friend became angry and is now not speaking to me either. Do you think I'm the one in the wrong here? Mom chose my toxic stepsister over me and kicked me out, but years later, I'm engaged and his company dropped her husband's contract as a client, and now she's blaming me. I'm a 26-year-old woman engaged to my fiancé, Jeff, who's also 26. We met on a dating app 4 years ago and have been together ever since. Jeff is my soulmate, the one person who has never disappointed me. My life hasn't been easy. My parents split up when I was only 2 years old, and my dad never really bothered with me afterward. While he did pay child support, he never showed much interest in being a part of my life. My mom, who's 48, wasn't exactly a great mom either. She was more focused on her own interests than on raising me. I basically grew up with nannies and babysitters. When I got older, I realized my mom was more into her social life than being a parent. She was a freelance artist and made enough money, thanks to child support, to not worry about me much. Honestly, I think if it wasn't for the money, she would have kicked me out long ago. She never seemed attached to me and mostly just waited for me to grow up and leave her alone. When I was about 13, my mom started dating Matt, who was 50. He had a daughter my age named Jess. When they first came over, my mom stressed how important it was for me to behave well. It struck me because she'd never cared about that with my previous boyfriends. Normally, she'd just let me know guests were coming, and I'd hide in my room until they left. But this time, I sensed my mom was serious about this guy, Matt. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bothered about my behavior. It made me realize she wouldn't have even noticed me if she wasn't into him. When I first met Matt and Jess, they seemed nice, and the introduction went smoothly. Little did I know what was coming next. Matt started coming over more often, and it felt like they were practically moving in together. It didn't bother me much as long as they left me alone. I was fine with it. They became a regular presence, with Jess visiting occasionally as she split her time between her mom's and our place. At first, they either treated me okay or just ignored me, which suited me fine since I wasn't too fond of any of them. I didn't care much about my mom, so caring about people connected to her was hard. All I wanted was some peace and quiet, which I had for a while. Then they decided to move in together permanently. I wouldn't have minded, but my mom said I had to share my room with my stepsister now. I refused. That room was mine, always had been, and it was the only place I felt at peace. In that house, I had my own little corner, and I wasn't about to give up my freedom by sharing my room with someone I barely knew. When I told my mom I wasn't going to share, we had a huge argument. She threatened to kick me out if I didn't obey. I was only 14, but I knew my rights. I felt like I had to stand my ground because my mom wasn't exactly trustworthy. Plus, it just made sense. I knew she couldn't kick me out until I was an adult without getting in trouble. So I called her bluff and told her she couldn't do it. She was frustrated but had to give in and let me keep my room. Instead, she decided to transform the basement into Jess's room. It wasn't as nice as mine, but my mom worked hard to make it comfortable. When she was finished, it looked just as good as any other room in the house. So I didn't see why it was such a big deal. But that's when Jess started disliking me, and I think it had something to do with my mom announcing to everyone during the house tour that Jess had to live in the basement because I wasn't willing to share my room. I couldn't understand why she'd make such a public announcement. I still can't figure out why she did it. Maybe she wanted to make me feel guilty by announcing it in front of Jess. But it just made me uncomfortable. Or perhaps she enjoys drama and wanted Jess to know I refused to share my room, which caused tension between us because Jess didn't seem like the type to let things slide. My mom's prediction was right. Jess didn't let it go, and from that day on, she treated me like the enemy. Even though she spent half the month with her mom, the days she was with us were unbearable. She was constantly mean to me and made hurtful remarks right to my face. Let me paint a picture of the things she would say. Once, she suggested that my dad left my mom because of me, and then she laughed as if it were a joke. She'd also poke fun at my looks, especially because I was a bit chubby back then. At school, she had a group of mean girls, and she never missed a chance to join in on bullying me with them. Before, she and her friends would just ignore me, and I preferred that. We were never friends, but that was better than being enemies. What hurt the most was that I hadn't even done anything to her. She was just upset that I didn't want to share my room with her. It seemed like such a silly reason for her to hate me so much and make my life miserable. My room was my sanctuary, especially with a mom like mine. Who could blame me for wanting my own space? Besides, if any of them had bothered to get to know me, I might have considered sharing. But she was a stranger, and I wasn't comfortable sacrificing my privacy for her. I never complained to my mom or Matt because they knew and didn't care. They'd turn a blind eye to my struggles because I wasn't important to them. So I had to endure it and let her walk all over me. I tried to stand up for myself sometimes, but it only made things worse. Our parents would intervene, and I'd end up getting grounded because, well, they favored her. She'd cry a bit and get away with it, but I couldn't fake tears like her, and I wasn't that manipulative. So I'd be the one punished while she got off easy, and I had to deal with it. Growing up there was awful, and I despised my life. When I was finally kicked out around my 18th birthday, I felt more relieved than anything else. I had endured my family's chaos for years, and it only got worse over time. Jess remained a nightmare to deal with, and our parents blindly supported her, no matter what. Over 4 years, she turned our entire high school year against me, and I was left with only a few friends who still talked to me. Everyone else despised me just because she did, and that was reason enough. It took a toll on my mental health, and I struggled in every aspect. I gained a lot of weight from binge eating, which worsened my appearance. I was overweight, battling acne, and my hair was a mess. On top of that, my grades were suffering, so not only did I look bad, but I also seemed unintelligent to everyone else. I had nothing going for me and hit rock bottom. Home life wasn't any better with Jess and my parents. My mom became increasingly unbearable, constantly comparing me to Jess, despite knowing she made my life worse. Things were bad before my mom married Matt and they moved in together, but they weren't this bad. It was disheartening that my mother didn't care about me before, but after she married Matt, things went from bad to worse. She went from being indifferent to actively making me feel terrible about myself. It felt like I was living with mean girls at home too. It was clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mother truly wanted, and I was just dealt the wrong cards. Both of them wished I'd disappear, and honestly, I wanted the same thing. My mother and Jess despised me, and Matt didn't care. With no other family besides my mother and no contact with my grandparents, I had nowhere to turn. I didn't feel right asking friends for help, so I toughed it out at home to at least have a roof over my head and food until I turned 18. But then, a couple of weeks before my birthday, something happened, and I was kicked out that same day. It was a weekend etched in my memory like it happened yesterday, one of the most traumatic and stressful days of my life. We had recently graduated, and Jess had started hanging out with a new, older crowd. She befriended someone whose brother, in his last year of college, became her boyfriend. They'd socialize with his friends, who were all older than us. I was aware of their activities but didn't dare tell my parents, fearing it would backfire. So I kept quiet about Jess drinking and likely smoking weed. I had no interest in those things. I was already struggling with weight and grades. I didn't need more trouble. But that day, I must have left my room unlocked before showering. Suddenly, I heard banging on the bathroom door, and my mother was screaming at me to come out immediately. I quickly dressed and rushed out to see what was going on. When I emerged from the shower, my mother, Matt, and Jess were waiting in my room, wearing serious expressions. My mother produced a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed, and even more damning, a large plastic baggie filled with what looked like grams of weed. I knew it wasn't mine, and so did Jess. But my parents didn't know that. Somehow, she must have planted it while I was away and then told my mom. They began yelling at me, accusing me of being a terrible person. It wasn't just about the alcohol and drugs. My mom also criticized me for being a disappointment and for eating all the food. She called me a waste, convinced I'd never amount to anything and would just keep living with them, wasting their money. I repeatedly tried to explain that none of it was mine, and I didn't know how it ended up in my room, but she wouldn't believe me. She got furious when I suggested Jess might have planted it to frame me. She yelled that I was always jealous of her and would never be as good at anything, which is why I was trying to shift the blame. I was in tears, but she didn't seem to care and kept yelling. Eventually, she stopped and told me I had to leave. I was baffled and asked her where I was supposed to go. She said she didn't care as long as I left because she was fed up with me. When I insisted I wasn't leaving, she threatened to call the cops and warned that at almost 18, they'd take drug charges seriously. She didn't want an addict in her house draining her resources. She said I had to fend for myself now because she was done pretending to be a happy family with someone who didn't deserve it. I begged her not to kick me out, knowing I had nowhere else to go and no money of my own. But she remained unmoved. She gave me until the end of the day to leave, or she'd call the police herself. I was stunned by her heartlessness, and even more so by the fact that neither Matt nor Jess objected. They acted like everything was normal. After a lot of tears and pleading, I reluctantly started packing my things. Between facing drug charges and living on the streets, I preferred the latter. By evening, I was finished packing. As I left the house, nobody said goodbye, and I didn't look back either. I spent a couple of hours at the park, but it got too cold, so I decided to go to a friend's place for the night, hoping they'd let me stay. I went to my best friend Amy's house and asked if I could stay for a few days. She already knew about my parents, so I didn't have to explain much. I shared the events of the day with her, and she was shocked. She suggested her parents could help if I let them. I'd always kept the way my parents treated me secret. Even from Amy's parents, unsure if anyone would believe me. I felt uncomfortable sharing such personal details of my life with others. That day, Amy insisted I tell her parents everything, and they were just as appalled as she was. They called my mother, trying to reason with her, but she was rude and unyielding. Realizing they couldn't change her mind, they did something incredibly kind. They offered to let me live with them for as long as I needed, promising their full support. They were well off, so money wasn't an issue, and Amy was willing to share her room with me because she cared about me. I spent the next few years living with them, attending community college since it was the only place I could get into with my grades. I worked and saved money to find my own place, but Amy's parents never pressured me to leave. They made sure I felt comfortable and supported. About 3 years ago, I finally saved enough to move out. I was proud of myself and deeply grateful to Amy and her parents. I couldn't have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, Amy's parents helped me settle into my new place and assured me I was always welcome back to visit or even live with them again. It was a turning point in my life. By then, I had shed a lot of weight, improved my health, and felt much better overall. I was also earning enough to support myself and had spent a good amount of time working on myself. I decided to start dating because I eventually wanted to get married and needed to start looking. Before Jeff, I had met a few guys, but things never progressed far. When I met Jeff, everything clicked. I realized he was the one meant for me. He was funny, cute, and seemed genuinely interested in me. When we started dating, I didn't know he was wealthy or set to inherit his family's chain of restaurants. I just liked him for who he was. It was only after a few months that he shared his family background, and I learned about his future inheritance. Some might assume that learning about his wealth could alter things for me, but honestly, he remained the same person I knew all along. Knowing about his background didn't change my feelings, and I loved him just as deeply as before. After about a year of dating, we decided to move in together, and he introduced me to his family a few months prior. I got along well with everyone, and they all liked me. Everything seemed perfect, so when he proposed recently, saying yes was an easy decision. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and everything's been going wonderfully. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I received an email from Jess. We hadn't spoken in almost 8 years, and I hadn't heard from my family since I was kicked out. I was puzzled as to why she'd reach out now, especially to make amends. Enough time had passed, and neither of us seemed interested in fixing things. So when I read her email apologizing for everything and admitting she'd been awful, I was really confused. She confessed to orchestrating everything in my room because she simply loathed me for no apparent reason. It was baffling why she would confess to it years later, and I sensed something wasn't right about the situation. The timing was suspicious, especially since I had just gotten engaged, and she likely knew about it from social media or word of mouth. Given that we attended the same high school, I decided to investigate further. After some digging, I discovered that Jess's husband owned the business that supplied plastic containers for takeaway orders to Jeff's restaurants. It was relatively easy for me to gather this information by creating a fake profile and stalking her online. Her husband's bio mentioned his line of work, which aligned with what I already knew about Jeff's business plans. I immediately informed Jeff about the connection. In the past few years, I've made a conscious effort to distance myself from my old life, avoiding following any family members online and asking friends not to update me on their news. So I had no idea that Jess had gotten married until I discovered her husband's connection to our business dealings. Upon learning this, Jeff and I decided to terminate our contract with him. The costs were high, and more significantly, I couldn't bring myself to engage with Jess again, even on a professional level. Jeff also mentioned that the quality of the products from Jess's husband had deteriorated over time, and they were already considering switching suppliers. So last week, a few days after I received that email from Jess, Jeff held a meeting with her husband and ended their contract. However, Jess seems to believe that I orchestrated this to seek revenge on her. She's been accusing me of this through emails and social media posts, despite our lack of contact for almost a decade. While I might harbor some resentment, it's not the driving force behind her husband losing our contract. A few days ago, she posted on social media, stating that many clients had been dropping them lately, and this was the final blow. However, she insisted that our decision was fueled solely by spite and labeled it highly unprofessional. She even tagged our Facebook page, creating quite a messy situation. While I can't deny there was a personal aspect to our decision, she also mentioned in her post that she and her husband had been losing clients consistently. While I feel somewhat remorseful, especially considering her struggles, I believe our decision was based on both personal and professional factors. I feel a bit guilty for influencing my fiancé to sever ties with my estranged stepsister's husband, Aita. Update: Jeff consulted with his dad's lawyers, who agree that our actions were justified. We've decided to pursue legal action against them, demanding the removal of their defamatory posts and pressing charges. The truth is, the products we were receiving were overpriced and subpar, so naturally, we sought better options elsewhere. It's purely coincidental that I'm married to the owner of that business. Instead of improving their services, she chose to tarnish our reputation on social media. It's absurd that I even felt sympathy for her given everything she put me through. Your support has helped me see things clearly, so thank you all for your comments and encouragement. Update 2. Jeff and his father initiated a defamation lawsuit against Jess and her husband a few days ago. We're scheduled to meet with a court-appointed mediator soon. Meanwhile, my mother has once again taken it upon herself to defend her stepdaughter. It feels like a high school drama, but thankfully, I can ignore them now without worrying about my living situation. Despite my mother's attempts to provoke me, I've chosen to block her and focus on my own life. I refuse to let their negativity affect me. I'm engaged to the man of my dreams, and I'm about to start a new chapter in my life. I have no room for them or their drama. Update 3. Quick update for you all. We won the defamation lawsuit thanks to the relentless efforts of my father-in-law's lawyers. They were able to swiftly resolve the matter, holding Jess and her husband accountable for their actions. Hopefully, this will prompt them to prioritize their business and meet their clients' expectations. With the legal battle behind us, Jeff and I can now shift our focus entirely to planning our wedding. I'm beyond excited to marry Jeff, my soulmate. I've waited so long to find someone like him, and now that I have, I'm holding on tight. Do you really think a company would hire the child of a poor single mother like you? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, but during my final interview, the notorious demon instructor said this to me. It was clear he looked down on me for coming from a single mother household and had no intention of hiring me. I struggled to keep my composure as the interview worsened. Reaching my limit, I took out my phone and called my father. You see, my father is actually the president of the bank. My name is Emma Miller. I'm a 23-year-old college senior searching for a job. My parents divorced last year, making my mom a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives, so I naturally stayed with my mom. Despite the divorce, my future plans were heavily influenced by my father, the CEO of the largest bank in the country. I admired him and aspired to work at his bank. Tomorrow, I have my final interview. I'm not the best student, and when I shared my goal of working at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to dissuade me, but also ridiculed me. I thought the ordeal would end after the interview, but looking back, it was truly awful. One day during my college years, a friend named Julia asked, "Hey Emma, have you decided where you're going after graduation?" For me, there's only one choice. The bank, I replied confidently. But our conversation drew murmurs from those around us. Just as I wondered if I had said something strange, Julia spoke up again. "Emma, it's hard to say, but you should know your place." To my shock, someone I considered a friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back, another classmate chimed in. "It's impossible for you. That bank is the largest in the country and the hardest to get into from this university. Only one person from here has been hired in the past 10 years. I knew that, of course. I hadn't told anyone that my father was the bank's CEO. If I did, people would assume I got in through nepotism, which would tarnish my father's reputation and make me feel inadequate. I hated being misunderstood and judged unfairly. "Emma, I'm saying this for your own good," Julia continued, but I cut her off. "I don't need your advice." Everyone's eyes were on me, their cold stares piercing my heart. Why do I have to hear this? I thought, as our teacher, noticing the commotion, approached. "What's going on here?" she asked. "Miller says she wants to work at North Trust Bank," the boy answered. The teacher's face tensed up. "Are you taking society for granted? Even the teacher, who was supposed to support students, denied my dream. There was no one to stand up for me. Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that? I retorted, determined to defend my ambition. I objected, but the teacher continued, piling on more criticism. "You're naive," she said. "My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They call him a demon interviewer," she added with a smug look. The teacher's surname was Anderson, a 29-year-old woman. If I encountered an interviewer with the same surname at North Trust Bank, it would likely be her father, a demon interviewer indeed. "Yes, that's right," she continued. "My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. "Is that at the Sun Plaza branch?" I asked, curious about the connection. "Yes," she replied, "and you're from a single mother household, right?" I wondered why she would ask that, but answered honestly, "Yes." Then the teacher showed a sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. From that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Julia, whom I thought was a close friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves. It was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions worsened with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank hiring process had 4 stages. A written test in the first stage, followed by 2 interviews with people from the head office for the second and third stages. The 4th and final stage was an interview with the hiring manager for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager, in other words, the highest-ranking hiring manager. I wanted to work at the Sun Plaza branch and had managed to pass the 3rd stage. "How did you pass the 3rd stage?" they asked, now surprised and anxious about my progress. Most of them had failed their desired company's 2nd stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began, and in my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus solely on myself. My motivation was to get an offer from North Trust Bank. My mind was set on that goal. One day, after class, Teacher Anderson started attacking me in front of everyone. "All right, everyone, listen up," she shouted to the students preparing to leave. Everyone turned around, curious about what was happening. "Emma Miller has cleared the 3rd round of North Trust Bank's exams," she announced. The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy, but with her next statement, everyone seemed to catch their breath. "But it seems she'll fail the 4th round." "Huh? What do you mean?" I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. "The interviewer for the 4th round has been decided. It's my father, the demon instructor Anderson." The surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. "Serves you right. Know your place. Good." The classroom filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends had turned their backs on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way for them to relieve the stress of job hunting. But it was different. I realized the situation around me was rooted in jealousy. They were envious of me for challenging something they wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her who isn't even good at studying. There's no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Miller is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult. It's the most challenging. It's impossible. So why is Miller trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange. The reality became apparent as job hunting progressed. Among those who passed, those who failed, and various others, no one here had much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, especially since her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her lead. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother gently encouraged me. Wrapped in her warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. "Don't forget, just do your best," my mother said as I left the house. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. Initially, there had been nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would be selected from this group. Just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate, my name was called. "Please come in." "Hello, thank you," I greeted as my final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. Anderson, the teacher's father, just as she had said, a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer, about 10 years younger than my father, and a man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, sitting at a slight distance with a computer. The interview began with typical questions from Anderson, starting with a self-introduction and my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. Then, the complaints started suddenly. "I don't really like female bank employees," Anderson said. Not knowing what to say, I fell silent. "Because they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea," he continued. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me, just like a man. I tried to appeal, responding flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far, yet the chief hiring officer, who should have been higher ranking than Anderson, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Anderson. Maybe Anderson was pressuring him too. That's what I thought, but there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Anderson spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. "You seem to come from a single-mother household, am I wrong?" he asked, probably looking at the documents I submitted from the university. They included my address and family composition. "Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother," I replied. As soon as he heard my words, Anderson began to laugh, his sinister smile echoing through the room. "I see you're from a single-mother household. What business does a poor person have here?" He blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I began to sweat. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious, but it was Anderson who started talking first. "Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you?" he mocked. "Huh? Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired. You're going to assume I'm poor." I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Anderson reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. "Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer?" I was frustrated but couldn't say anything back. This was the bank my father worked at, the one I had always admired. I didn't want to lose because of this one man, but I didn't know what to say in return. "Why don't you say something?" Anderson further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly, and I became incredibly calm to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. "Understood," I said. Anderson seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. "Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up?" he asked. Finally, another person spoke, having been sitting the whole time. "You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do?" "I know about you because I've heard from my daughter," Anderson said, revealing that the teacher had shared information about me. "Is this not a leak of information?" I thought, but it didn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. "What are you doing? Making a phone call? Are you mocking this interview? Stop it now, or I'll reject you right here." Anderson threatened me, but I wasn't fazed at all. I spoke into the phone. "Hello, Dad. Your father is here. What can a person from a single-parent family do, clinging to their separated father?" Was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Anderson. "Hey, Dad, can you come to the interview room now?" Of course, he agreed. "I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me, okay?" my father said before I hung up the phone. The person in charge of the recording stared at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. But of course, the one who reacted the most was Anderson. Pointing at me, he said, "You're finished. Making a phone call during an interview? Unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something." I finally decided to argue back. I couldn't take it anymore. This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Anderson. The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had stood up to this man's abusive behavior until now. The recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Anderson to be punished? Anderson slammed his right hand on the table with all his might, a loud thud echoing throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. "Brian Wilson, you know him, right?" I asked. For a moment, Anderson looked as if I had hit a nerve. He immediately countered, "Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank." To Anderson, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added, "So if my last name was Wilson until recently, would you think it's a coincidence?" Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Anderson then stood up from his chair and muttered, "What did you say?" His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. "Emma Wilson. That was my full name until recently. My father is Brian Wilson, the president of the bank. 63-year-old Brian Wilson." "You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening." Anderson let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview. At that moment, my father entered the room. As the door opened, he said words that echoed my own feelings. "This is hardly an interview at all. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your hard work," the two men said, standing up to greet my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt the extraordinary presence he commanded. The president of the bank stood before us, and Anderson's face turned pale. His mouth hung open in shock. My father then spoke to him. "Hey Anderson, what were you doing to my daughter, huh?" My father was a big man who had practiced judo. With his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep, resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening, even the once confident Anderson. "Why, yes, sir," Anderson squeaked out, unable to maintain his composure. "I don't want to hear your excuses," my father cut him off. He then turned to the man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. It was the first time I learned his name, Green, from the nameplate that had been bent and hard to read. "Green, aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now?" my father demanded. "I'm very sorry," Green replied, bending at a 90-degree angle and bowing. The young clerk in the room looked terrified, even though he had done nothing wrong. He was drenched in sweat. "Hey, clerk, what's your name?" my father called out in a gentle voice, which only made it more terrifying. "My name is Harris." "Mr. Harris, can you send today's interview record to my PC? You're also recording the audio, right?" my father asked. I later learned that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed, but also recorded as a backup. Thanks to that, Anderson's misconduct was exposed, and he was punished. Anderson was trembling, like a frog stared down by a snake. "Hey, Anderson." "Yes, what is it?" Anderson stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He was a completely different person from earlier. "Apologize to my daughter. It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank," my father commanded. At my father's words, Anderson bowed deeply and apologized. "Sorry. But I couldn't forgive him, even after seeing that." "Dad, I can't forgive him," I said firmly. When I murmured, weakly, my father nodded in understanding. Walking up to Anderson, he seemed like a lion about to hunt a small animal. "Do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this, Anderson?" My father's pressure made Anderson freeze. "You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her?" No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Anderson began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. "At least over 100 people," he admitted. I was shocked to hear that he had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful, even though it was my father's company. "Hey, Green," my father called out. "Yes, I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this. So I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Anderson, I'll never forgive you." Anderson gasped, frightened. My father continued, "I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right?" Hearing this, Anderson collapsed on the spot as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe. And so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Anderson were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned, and Anderson was sued by the company and the victims group. Anderson, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, the teacher with a forced smile congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. "Miss Anderson, this is Brian Wilson, the president of North Trust Bank," the principal introduced. "Oh yes," Miss Anderson replied, her expression faltering. "I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is. Emma Miller's father." "What? What did you say?" I added to the surprise of the teacher's words. "He's my mother's ex-husband and my father." My words caused a stir in the class. Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they'd have been friendlier to me. "Miss Miller's father is the president of North Trust Bank," the teacher said upon learning the truth, becoming an empty shell. The principal then addressed the teacher. "This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Wilson's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Wilson's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you? Well, that is never mind the excuses. Tell me only the truth. Is it a fact?" Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, "Yes. Mr. Wilson wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Miller voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue. What will you do?" The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teachers seemed to understand as well and ultimately resigned from the school, effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action, one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary banker like my father. My daughter, Erin, now a college student, has been living independently for about a year despite receiving a reasonable monthly allowance and supposedly dedicating herself to a part-time job. When Erin returned home, she looked worn out and thin. "Are you pushing yourself too hard? Are you getting enough to eat?" I asked with concern. "I'm managing with things like cereal," she replied, "but I crave more." Yet Erin fell silent, confirming my uneasy suspicions. She thanked me, saying, "Thanks for the $13 a month, Mom." I couldn't believe what I heard. $13? I've been transferring $1,300 every month. My name is Laura. People have always said I have poor judgment in men. My first boyfriend in college cheated on me within 3 months. Then I dated a younger guy who became a freeloader, likely because I was footing the bills. The man I married after 4 years of dating turned out to be both a spendthrift and a cheat. After divorcing him, I raised Erin as a single mom for 10 years. Erin, whom I once perceived as young and naive, has matured into a dependable daughter, taking the lead in household chores. Despite my insistence that she need not exert herself so much, she remains steadfast, asserting, "You're already doing so much for us, Mom. I worry you'll burn out if I don't help." Moreover, Erin never slacks in her studies. "I want to contribute like you, Mom. I don't want to be a burden," she expresses, diligently preparing for her college entrance exams since her high school days. Though she may exhibit traces of naivety, I wholeheartedly believe she's an exceptional daughter. After diligent studying, Aaron received the long-awaited acceptance letter from a prestigious public university. Together, we eagerly searched the bulletin board until we spotted Aaron's applicant number, and we clasped hands in joy. As the days swiftly passed before her college journey began, we decided to take a celebratory hot spring trip, relishing every moment of the relaxation. While immersed in the soothing warmth up to my shoulders, I glimpsed my daughter, her cheeks rosy with contentment, and I found her endearing words, "Mom, this is so wonderful," deeply touching. In that serene moment, I silently vowed to protect her with all my heart, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As Aaron embarked on her college journey, she left the nest with a blend of pride in her growth and a hint of loneliness. I bid her farewell, watching her set off on her new path. Since Aaron began living independently, our nightly phone calls became a cherished ritual. With her knack for household chores and reliability beyond her years, I didn't harbor major concerns about her solo living arrangements. Yet the notion of a young woman navigating life alone stirred a lingering unease within me. I questioned if my worries were excessive, but Aaron's cheerful conversations each evening brought me solace. Those end-of-day calls became my much-needed moments of relaxation. Aaron would often share details about her college life, her classes, her new friends, her involvement in the music club, and the intriguing upperclassmen she encountered there. Hearing about her vibrant daily experiences filled me with joy. Near the semester's end, Aaron's voice carried a hint of tension as she shared, "You know what?" To my delight, she revealed the happy news. "I've started dating someone." The lucky guy was Ian, the senior she met at the club. While I congratulated her with genuine enthusiasm, a twinge of concern lingered within me. As the daughter of someone often deemed unlucky in love, I couldn't shake the worry that perhaps my own romantic misfortunes had been inherited by her. Sensing my unease, Aaron cautiously inquired, "Would you like to meet him someday?" I reassured her with a bright tone, "Absolutely." When summer vacation began, Aaron returned home, accompanied by Ian. Upon meeting him, I discovered Ian to be a well-groomed and polite young man. "Pleasure to meet you, I'm Ian. I'm dating your daughter," he greeted me with a firm handshake as soon as I opened the door. His demeanor exuded responsibility, easing any lingering concerns I had. Ian sported no tattoos or piercings, yet carried himself with a refined air. The rolled-up sleeves of his shirt added a touch of classic charm, evoking memories of my own youthful attractions. A curious sense of nostalgia washed over me in his presence. We sat down for iced tea together, and I quickly noticed that Ian was not only responsible but also incredibly thoughtful. He graciously offered to carry the tray of iced tea I had prepared and promptly refilled my empty cup when it ran low. "Ian seems like a really decent guy," I whispered to Aaron when he briefly left the table. Aaron chuckled shyly. "Well, Mom, you were worried, weren't you?" "Of course, darling. It's only natural for a mother," I replied. Aaron laughed, "But honestly, Mom, I'm doing just fine. I think I've got better luck in love than you." We both shared a hearty laugh at that, and I couldn't help but agree. You might be onto something there. As the second semester commenced, Aaron, determined not to be a burden, took on multiple jobs to support herself. Despite my monthly financial support for emergencies, she seemed intent on saving every penny for the future. Trusted by her employers, Aaron juggled school and worked tirelessly, leaving little time for her club activities. Concerned, I asked, "Are you sure you're managing? Don't hesitate to use the money I send, and do you need me to come help with chores?" Aaron replied softly, "I'm okay," her voice tinged with wariness. Since Aaron couldn't attend the club anymore, Ian began frequenting our home out of concern. "You have your own worries, don't you? I can handle things myself, really. I'm fine," Aaron reassured him. "If you say so," Ian replied, though his worry lingered. One evening, returning from work, I was greeted by the aroma of a surprise hamburger Ian had prepared. It was delicious. Having Ian around makes things easier. Aaron's cheerful tone betrayed her fondness for him. As time passed, Aaron's calls grew less frequent due to her busy schedule. She'd update me sporadically, but it was evident she was juggling a lot. Despite my reassurances, I couldn't shake the worry. Ian made sure she ate well on his visits, but on other days, Aaron resorted to cereal for sustenance. Despite my financial support, it seemed she was struggling. Aaron wasn't one to squander money, so the situation puzzled me deeply. When I confided in my mother, she brushed off my concerns, remarking, "You're worrying excessively about your adult daughter. It's hard to let go." Perhaps she was right. Erin would turn 19 soon. Though she still seemed like a child to me, the world saw her as an adult, especially with Ian by her side. Maybe I should just trust that she'll ask for help if she really needs it, I mused, attempting to ease my anxiety. Yet finding peace amid my worries proved challenging. Winter break arrived, and Aaron's return home revealed a noticeable change. She appeared thinner than before, her once slender frame now visibly diminished. Dark circles mirrored her tired eyes. When she explained she had been working late the previous night, coming straight home thereafter, concern flooded me. Aaron, are you pushing yourself too hard lately? Are you eating properly? I inquired, unable to hide my worry. I'm eating properly, cereal and such, Aaron responded. Her sudden silence spoke volumes. Hastily she added, but I've mastered the art of cereal. Her smile strained. It seemed forced, prompting a gnawing worry within me. Was she truly eating well? Despite my consistent financial support and her diligent work, a troubling sensation crept over me. Aaron's next words only heightened my unease. Thanks for the $13 every month, Mom. 13? I send you $1,300 every month, I replied, stunned by the revelation. A sense of foreboding gripped me. Aaron, where do you keep your checkbook and debit card? It's in my desk drawer at home. Aaron replied. I'm heading to your place now, Aaron. There's something I need to check, I announced suddenly. Aaron looked surprised by my abrupt declaration but nodded in agreement. As we rode the train to her apartment, conversation flowed between us. The first topic broached was the matter of her mistaken allowance. Aaron explained that she maintained a living expenses account for her part-time earnings and a savings account where I deposited her allowance. She had recently depleted her savings purchasing textbooks and other necessities for the new semester. When she checked her account balance, it was a mere $78. Despite my consistent financial support, she had never inquired about the exact amount. Assuming the $78 was the sum total of my contributions over 6 months, she calculated it to approximately $13 per month. Is that about right? I asked. I thought so, but I thought you might be struggling too, Mom. Honestly, you're such a silly girl. How much do you think I earned? Don't underestimate me, Aaron retorted to my semi-joking remark. Her words seemed to ease the tension momentarily, but a shadow crossed her face once more. It dawned on me why Aaron hadn't accessed the money I sent. Someone must have gained access to her bank account, and the most suspicious candidate was Ian, who frequented her apartment. Aaron appeared to be in denial, and I found myself reluctant to entertain the idea that her seemingly kind boyfriend would be involved in theft. I nervously watched as the train approached the nearest station. Upon reaching Aaron's home, we hurriedly retrieved her checkbook and made a beeline for the nearest ATM at the bank. With evening drawing near and the clock ticking past late afternoon, time was of the essence. We inserted the checkbook into the ATM and anxiously awaited the update. The balance displayed on the checkbook left us both speechless. Despite the consistent deposits of $1,300 each month, there were clear signs of frequent withdrawals. Erin's complexion paled as she whispered softly, "Why?" Concerned by her visibly strained state, I escorted Aaron to a nearby coffee shop, where I resolved to delve deeper into the issue at hand. My primary focus was understanding how her checkbook was being managed. Erin disclosed that she stored her checkbook and debit card in a locked drawer within her desk. However, the key to this drawer was stored elsewhere, making it accessible to anyone entering the apartment. The only individual with the potential to access her room in her absence was her boyfriend, Ian, who possessed the spare key. Furthermore, the PIN associated with her debit card was the same as the one she commonly used for her other cards. It became evident that someone had likely observed her during a money withdrawal. I must admit, I was careless when setting up the account. I'm sorry, honey. Mom should have been more careful, I confess. I never anticipated someone else would access the money. It's not your fault, Mom. I should have been more vigilant in managing it, Erin responded. Well, we both share responsibility, I interjected, but the person at fault here is the one who spent money without permission. Yeah, you're right, Erin replied, her tone lacking its usual vigor. Understandably so, she had been betrayed by the person she likely trusted the most. Witnessing my daughter so crestfallen tugged at my heartstrings. I'll handle this, I declared unexpectedly. What? You may want to downplay this, but it's a serious offense. We need to gather evidence and report it to the police. The police? Erin's voice quivered, clearly unsettled. Yes, it's necessary, but don't worry. I'll handle everything. It's all to ensure your peace of mind during college, all right? I reassured her, and Aaron nodded reluctantly. A few days later, I sought the help of a private detective agency, the same one that assisted me when my husband was suspected of infidelity. I need you to investigate my daughter's boyfriend. His name is Ian Mack. He's a sophomore in economics at the same university as my daughter. We suspect he may have been misusing the money I've been sending to her, I explained, displaying a photo of Ian from Aaron's messages on my phone. They agreed to take on the case without hesitation, despite their steep fees. It was a necessary expense to resolve this matter for Aaron's sake. As we awaited the results of the investigation, Aaron chose to commute to college from my house due to her anxiety. The journey took over an hour each way, which proved challenging for Aaron, but she found solace in returning home each evening. One night, she prepared granola for dinner. Just like you said, I've become quite the cereal connoisseur, Aaron remarked with a confident wink. My heart ached at the realization that she must have been eating this meal almost daily. A month later, the investigation's findings arrived. There was undeniable evidence that Ian had been making unauthorized withdrawals from Aaron's account. According to the investigator, shortly after Ian and Aaron began dating, his lifestyle markedly improved, as attested by his friends. What shocked me even more was that Ian's transgressions didn't stop there. It turned out he was involved with several other women. I was handed a collection of photographs. Ian with his arm around different women, happily dining at restaurants, enjoying arcades, and strolling through hotel districts. In each image, a man with a distinctive beauty mark, a teardrop tattoo, was unmistakably Ian. It seems Ian hasn't just been using the money you've been sending your daughter to impress his friends. He's also been using it to maintain relationships with multiple girlfriends, the investigator grimly informed me. Thank you, I replied, bowing my head deeply. It was time to take action. I filed a complaint with the police and sent written explanations of Ian's actions to his parents, his university, and all of his girlfriends. Initially, Ian denied everything, but he eventually confessed when confronted by multiple girlfriends. Naturally, all of the girlfriends, including Aaron, severed ties with him. As a result of the police investigation, Ian was expelled from the university and sent back to his parents' home. Fortunately, his parents were reasonable and came to my house with a humble gift to apologize. For the time being, his parents have agreed to reimburse the stolen money. I'll make our stupid son repay this, even if it kills him, Ian's father vowed, his voice choked with emotion. According to what Aaron heard through the grapevine, Ian is now working multiple jobs to repay his parents. By the time this ordeal settled, spring had arrived. To mark the end of this unfortunate chapter, we decided to celebrate Aaron's spring break with our first trip to a hot spring resort in over a year. Aaron had managed to reclaim her life since then, her complexion and physique returning to a healthy state. As we soaked in the warm baths, indulged in delicious food from the inn, and relaxed in front of the TV, I felt like we were finally able to enjoy some peace after a long while. Just before drifting off, Aaron's voice came from beneath the covers. Hey, what's on your mind? Remember how you and Dad split because of his reckless spending and affairs, right? Aaron's words caught me off guard. My ex-husband, much like Ian, was someone who flaunted wealth to impress others, yet struggled to cover basic expenses due to his extravagant habits and moral lapses. I served my ex-husband with divorce papers, just as you did with Ian. It seems we have a pattern of choosing similar types of men, don't we? Aaron offered a rueful smile. Indeed. We'll have to be more cautious from now on, I replied, trying to sound upbeat despite feeling a bit uneasy. By the way, you seem happier lately. Did you meet someone special? No way, it's not a boyfriend, Aaron exclaimed teasingly. Could he possibly become one? Lately, I have been developing a friendship with the investigator assigned to our case, but I hadn't mentioned it to Aaron yet. Even so, was there a spark, or was it just the bond between a mother and daughter who've been through a lot together? Hang on, are you sure it's going to work out this time, Mom? Aaron teased with a playful chuckle. Well, it should, right? Unlike your father, he seems serious and dependable. But let's get serious here. If it's my turn after all this, Mom, it won't be a laughing matter, I replied, adopting a serious tone. Got it? I'll tread carefully, Aaron responded solemnly. But then, unable to contain our amusement, we exchanged a look and burst into laughter.